Please welcome the panel to the stage. Rhowch groeso i'r panel a'i cadeirydd Sioned Williams.
Diolch yn fawr. Pnawn da i bawb. So at Westminster, the Conservative government are running scared of calling a general election. They don't want to give the public a chance to give their views on the bad job that they're doing. But there is one election that is going to happen before long on Thursday, Thursday, the 2nd of May. And of course that is for the police and crime commissioners. So I am MS for South Wales West, and I'm also Plaid Cymru spokesperson on social justice. And although policing, of course, isn't devolved, the social justice agenda has a very close relationship with the work of our present and hopefully future police and crime commissioners. And joining me today, as you heard on the panel, are some of our candidates for those elections. So the PCC elections, as you probably know, are about choosing the commissioner for each one of the 4 police forces that we have in Wales. And the commissioners are responsible for holding those police forces to account and for the budget that they have, which is funded, of course, in different sections by Westminster, by Welsh Government, and the policing precept, which is part of the council tax bill. Felly, croeso mawr I chi gyd prynhawn ma. Very warm welcome to you all. Firstly, could you just introduce yourselves for those in the room who may not know you? A little bit perhaps about your background and why you're standing in this election. So falle Dafydd, chi gynta.
Iawn, wel, diolch yn fawr iawn. Mae'n gret fod yma yn y Nghynhadledd eleni eto yn siarad am gwaith y Comisynwyr. Dwi'n gomisynydd sydd wedi bod yn y swydd ers 2016. Ges i'n ethol yn 2016 a hefyd ges i'n ail ethol wedyn yn yr etholiadau diwetha rhyw 2 blynedd yn ôl fel Comisiynydd ardal Dyfed Powys, sy'n ardal eang iawn wrth gwrs. O ran ymhrofiad, fe weithes i maes Plismona am dros degawd, tua 15 o flynyddau, fel dadansoddydd troseddol cydwybodaeth yn gweithio gyda'r heddlu yn weithredol, a wedi fes i Brifysgol Aberystwyth i ddarlithio troseddeg. So na'n nghefndir I, a dwi wedi bod yn gomisynydd nawr ers 8 mlynedd.
A chi'n amlwg moyn dod nôl am fwy?
Odw, dwi wedi derbyn yr enwebiad I fynd eto am yr etholiad. Wrth gwrs, mae'r etholiad yn mynd I fod yn un rhywfaint yn rhyfedd, achos mae ar ben I hun ar y diwrnod. Dyn ni'n mynd ysgol fydd na turnout uchel. Felly mae'n bwysig bod ni'n cael cefnogaeth brwd Plaid Cymru yn dod allan a hefyd cefnogaeth eraill I ddod I gefnogi ni fel Comisynwyr yn ystod cyfnod etholiadol sydd yn dechrau dydd Llun fel mae'n digwydd yn swyddogol a mae'r etholiad ar yr ail o fai.
Diolch yn fawr. A Ann, drosodd I chi nawr.
Ie, diolch yn fawr hefyd am yr enwebiad ac am y gwahoddiad I siarad efo chi y pnawn yma. Anne Griffith, I'm from Barmouth originally, but have spent most of my adult life in Ynys Môn. I'm a registered social worker with 40 years experience and have specialised in child protection. And of course, for most of those 40 years, have worked very closely and in collaboration with the police. For the last 20 years, I have been an independent social care consultant, again specialising in child protection and safeguarding, chairing child protection conferences, reviews for children who are looked after, and latterly secure accommodation panels where children have lost their liberty, and also child practice reviews where unfortunately a child will have died due to abuse. I've also had a 10-year public appointment with the Ministry of Justice, where I was responsible for investigating financial crime, financial abuse against people who had lost their mental capacity. And I'm also an advocate, sorry, I'm getting my words mixed up. I'm also an associate for Oxford Brookes University, where I teach on the leadership programme for social work managers, senior managers in social care. In 2016, I was very fortunate to be appointed by Arfon Jones as the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales. And in that role, I was responsible for women in justice, domestic abuse, mental health, and children and young people, and was instrumental in working with the force to develop a children's strategy in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and also setting up the Young People's Commission. So that's a little bit of a background about me.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch i chi.
Diolch yn fawr. Dennis.
I'm Dennis Clarke, and I'm standing as your candidate for South Wales, a huge area in terms of population. Listening to the other two candidates here, I'm really enthused by the fact that our backgrounds are so different. We should be able to work really well together if we're all elected as PCCs. My background is as a, I suppose, legal aid lawyer is the easiest way to describe it. I've dealt with mainly criminal cases, so my knowledge of the criminal process, the way in which the whole thing is set up is excellent. I've caused many changes to be made to the system, so I should know it quite well. During that time, I've not only dealt with criminal cases, but a lot of domestic abuse cases, not just in the criminal field, but for the victims. I've dealt with all sorts of other areas. I suspect one of my extra specialities is judicial review. Again, taking on judges, the police, the prison service, the court system as a whole, government departments. I take them all on, I really don't care. I did develop a knowledge as to how they work, so I found that negotiating with a lot of the top knobs was quite useful, because if you know how they work and you know what you're arguing about, they can tend to listen. If they don't listen, I sue them. And I have a pretty good reputation on that score. During my time dealing with all those things, I've also dealt significantly with criminal justice committees, usually very welcome on them, especially by the judges who tend to be the chairs on them, because they use me to control everybody else, because I would be the only person on a criminal justice committee that could be considered independent. I didn't have an axe to grind other than to make sure that things were dealt with properly, whereas others on the committees tend to be looking after themselves, and in looking after themselves they have to look after the others on the committee, and they come to decisions, or they try to come to decisions that really don't benefit us but benefit them in being able to produce what they think they can produce. And just like Anne, in fact, I was 10 years allocated, I don't know what the word is, appointed by the MOJ to be chair of 3 counties courts board. The main task there was to try and stop the government from closing down local courts. Well, you can see how well that worked. But we ended up having to understand that the best we could organise was closing down the correct courts. And I think we're seeing what the effect of that is at the present time. So I think that probably summarises my background. I could go into, I'm a councillor, I'm a local trustee of a charity. What else have I got?
Well, I think we can agree that, as you said, Dennis, and as we've all heard, we're very fortunate to have these 3 candidates with the background that you have, with the experience you have, with the knowledge that you have, to be our candidates in this election. And I should say, if we have a 4th candidate, because obviously there are 4 police forces, our 4th candidate unfortunately couldn't be here today, Donna Cushing, who is standing for Gwent. And she's a Plaid Cymru councillor in Caerphilly and was the candidate last time in 2021, so we obviously wish her well as well. So obviously if you're in the Gwent Force area, please make sure you get in touch in order to help out with that campaign. If I could go back to you, Dafydd, you've been, as you said, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Dyfed Powys for the past 8 years. Can I ask you what you're most proud of achieving during that time?
Wow. trying to condense 8 years into 10 or 15 minutes is going to be, I guess, quite challenging. The highlights that I have, I guess, and just reflecting on the panel that we have here today as well, I've taken the job very seriously in reality. Now, you'd expect that from people, but we've got people who have got the credible experience within policing, within criminal justice, working from a safeguarding point of view, as Anne alluded to. That is critically important in the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, because we hold these agencies to account. It isn't just the police force, by the way. We're not just responsible for holding the Chief Constable to account. We also chair the Local Criminal Justice Board, and we are therefore working with Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, Prison and Probation Service, CPS. All of these arrangements are so important. Local government is a key link for us, working in partnership here across Wales, and obviously into Welsh Government as well as the Home Office. In terms of my proudest moments, I guess, looking back at the things that we've achieved, in 2016 I made a big election pledge to bring CCTV back into the towns of Dyfed, Powys, and we now have something in the region of about 160 cameras across 25 towns. It is used daily, approximately 10 or 15 times a day, to help officers in terms of the deployment of officers, but also in the, and therefore the prevention of crime, but also in the investigation of crime. I was just given a story last week by the Chief Constable of an attempted arson in Llanelli, that the CCTV monitoring staff were able to watch in situ this happening, and the fire brigade was called within 4 minutes. That arson was in effect prevented. Huge, significant safeguarding of a property, but also I would suggest that it's being used daily to save lives. So I'm really proud about that, and every time I walk into the Force Communication Centre where all the monitoring staff are there, it genuinely gives me a sense of pride and joy. There are other headlines. We've got a rural crime team in Dyfed, Powys, something that we emulated and supported sort of the learning from North Wales. So we need to take some of the best practice from some of the forces and make sure that we make these services across the whole of Wales. It's a bit of a stain on South Wales' force that they don't have a rural crime team, so that might be something that could be pledged from Plaid Cymru, that we would have a rural crime team in each of our forces supporting rural communities, because we are currently experiencing an increase targeting of our rural communities, from the theft of plant, theft of livestock, and we also have issues from a point of view of vulnerabilities in our rural community because of isolation, domestic violence in the settings that we need to, again, break down some of those barriers. So the CCTV, the rural crime team, we've actually got something in the region of about 150 additional police officers in Dyfed, Powys today compared to when I started, and also, very, very importantly, we're bucking the trend in relation to police staff. So every police force needs to have a blended workforce. We need to have police officers who are supported by professionals in other fields, and we've got approximately 150 additional police staff alongside the additional police officers. And one thing we will hear a lot of in these elections from other parties is that they will lay claim to the increase in police officer numbers. That isn't accurate. The police officer numbers are delivered by local precept, local taxation, and delivered by your local police and crime commissioners. So they are some of the headlines. I could go on, but I know time will be against us, and we've got other questions. But they are just some of the headlines over the last 8 years, and I'm looking forward with some enthusiasm to being re-elected and taking the force further forward over the next 4 years.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. And if I can just add as well, obviously, many of the committees and cross-party groups that I sit on in the Senedd, your reputation, Dafydd, as someone who has taken that role seriously and instituted real change. I know that you have a tremendously valuable reputation in the Senedd, and that is cross-party, I have to say. You know, when we have a Plaid Cymru Police and Crime Commissioner, or, you know, they do take the job seriously, don't they? They do instigate change, and the thoroughness with which you've approached your role has gone a long way, I can say, in Cardiff Bay. Allai troi ato chi nawr, Anne a Dennis. Anne, yn amlwg, chi wedi bod yn rhan o'r swyddfa yn y gorffennol, ond o ran chi eich hunan te, so chi yn cael eich ethol i'r rôl arweiniol yma, be fyddech chi moyn cyflawni, rhai penawdau?
Okay, well, increased visibility, I think, is really, really important. We hear on a daily basis about the lack of trust there is in police force across the whole of England and Wales. And I think that building that relationship now is going to be absolutely fundamental. Getting back to basics so that police officers are curious, that they're interested, that they listen. So creating that listening culture, that learning environment is absolutely crucial. And also focusing on the most vulnerable. And I think by doing that, by seeing that what the police force is all about is preventing crime and protecting the vulnerable, I think, again, it's back to basics. And by doing that, you're going to cover things like serious and organised crime. You're going to cover modern slavery, domestic abuse, violence against women and girls. The police can't say, oh, we're not going to investigate that. You know, enforcement is about enforcing the law. So for me, it's about getting those sort of fundamental principles right. And also for me, professional standards. It's not good enough to be hearing about police officers entering the force with a criminal record. Vetting has got to be sorted out. Recruitment has got to be robust. And any sniff of inappropriate behaviour has got to be stamped on right from the very start. There's no role for a police officer who is a coercive controller at home. There is no place in the police force for women who are victims of domestic violence at home. They must be able to turn to their own managers and say they are victims, because how can they go out and help victims of crime in the community if they can't say that they too are victims? So it's very much from a principle point of view. And when I talk about vulnerable people, well, who are more vulnerable than children? Who are more vulnerable than older people, people with mental health problems who are targeted by serious and organised crime. So the whole thing really comes together, I think, on those three principles.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. And Dennis, could you highlight some of your priorities were you to be elected?
Well, listening to my two colleagues, first of all, Dafydd has set such a high bar for us, hasn't he? So congratulations to him. And it just goes to show what Plaid Cymru can do for our area. And what Anne says, completely agree with everything. In fact, it was just this morning driving up that I heard that there's a move to push forward quickly with abuse cases so that instead of interviewing the people and then sending the file off to the CPS where it'll sit for 3 months, they're now talking about the custody sergeants charging and presumably getting it taken to court within 2 weeks, which is what we used to have. Back in the day, I was quite used to things moving that quickly. Sometimes you'd be in court the following morning. Now what do we have? We have such a long period of time between the interview and going to court, that the victim is going to suffer during that time because the person's out there, usually interfering with the process, and it gives the victim a lot of time to reconsider whether they can really stand the pressure. So that's a good move. But unfortunately, whereas I'm listening to it saying, thank goodness for that, I then listen on a little bit more and I hear that there's an arrangement between the CPS and the police, and that's where the alarm bells ring, because if it's an arrangement between those two, I'm sorry, there will be ways in which they can overcome this speed. The CPS will not want to lose its control, I just fear it's going to fail if we're not very careful. And I think in Wales we can actually identify these things because we have the experience right across the piece and we can talk more sensibly about it. And for me, I would like to see so many other things. I want to see the system, the CJS speed up. I've got no doubt it can happen. We just need people to sit and listen to us, and for us as PCCs, hopefully, to be able to stand our ground and say, well, we know it's difficult, but you've got to do it. and hopefully get people to do it. I've got other concerns with the prison service that there is a worry that a bit of software they use, because of the way it's used, turns out to be racist and tends to explain why more ethnic minority people end up in prison. They don't get bail because of the way in which the material is input. And the prison service, I know from experience, you can't talk to them. They won't let the academics in to actually look at these things. But I happen to enjoy computer programming, so it's going to be another one of my target areas. I think that's enough for now, because put us all together and you can see where we're headed.
The question of data is an important one. I know that Plaid Cymru are currently trying to work with the government through the cooperation agreement, and I know on the Equality and Social Justice Committee, on which I sit, we've recommended that we have an observatory set up on this in Cardiff University, so we can understand, for instance, those unacceptable over-representations of ethnic minority groups in the criminal justice system, and for instance, and also on women. Before I come back to you on that point, more about women in the criminal justice system, Dafydd, os allai jyst ofyn i di siarad tipyn am yr hyn chi wedi cyflawni ac am eich profiad. Os gewch chi chael ethol, beth ydych chi, beth yw'r camau nesaf i chi, beth yw'r pethau nesaf chi'n anelu at?
Ie, cwestiwn da. A i wedi gweud, fi'n mynd i dechrau le oedd Ann yn sôn am beth i sicrhau bod gyda ni llys sy'n weledol allan yn y gymuned. Felly fyddwch chi falle yn ymwybodol bod na toriad wedi dod yn y nifer o Police Community Support Officers yn ni'n gallu ariannu, achos bod Llywodraeth Blaid Lafur yn y Senedd yn Gaerdydd wedi torri'r ffigwr. Maen nhw wedi cwtogi y nifer, enghraifft yn Dyfed Powys yn hytrach na fod yn 74 maen nhw'n ariannu, maen nhw nawr yn ariannu 44. Felly fi byddai'n neud yn un o'r flaenoriaethau y llu yn y dyfodol, fyddwn ni'n sicrhau bod yr tîmau plismona bro yn tîmau cryf, a bod y niferoedd o Police Community Support Officers yn cael eu cadw ar y lefel sydd gyda ni ar hyn o bryd. Ond yn bellach na, i ni wedi ailfyddsoddi yn y tîmau plismona bro yn Dyfed Powys. Mae gyda ni Rhingyll nawr sy'n rheoli'r tîm, a mae gyda ni swyddog yn gweithio law wrth law gyda'r Police Community Support Officer. Felly mae yna strwythur fwy cryf a cadar yn weledol allan yn y gymuned. A'r pwynt arall yw, fi wedi dechrau defnyddio'r term a visible and inaccessible police service. The accessibility of the service is quite challenging at the moment. So trying to ring for police service through 101 is something that we've identified in Dyfed Powys isn't as good as it should be. So we're investing £1 million over the next 12 months. So that is a decision I've already made in terms of my budget for next year, but it'll be a priority for me to see that come to fruition. So there'll be a new telephony system, and we're going to be recruiting over the next couple of months an additional 25 members of staff working in that first point of contact. Because if the police can get that first point of contact accurate, as Dennis was alluding to in terms of that timeliness through the criminal justice system, I think it'll be vastly improved. And we want to see within our communities a visible and an accessible police service that is responsible and responsive to the communities that they serve. Felly dyna doi blaenoriaeth, fi'n credu fyddai'n edrych i sicrhau bod ni'n cadw i ryw raddau ac yn blaenoraethu, ond yn bellach na hynny hefyd, fyddwn ni'n cadw ar y gwaith i ni wneud o ran trais yn erbyn menywod a trais rhyw yn benodol. Mae dipyn o waith wedi cael ei wneud dros y blynydde diwetha yn y maes yma, ond fyddai'n flaenoriaeth i fi eto os fyddai'n cael y fraint o fod yn gomisynydd am bedair blynedd arall, yn sicrhau bod ni'n yn y lle cyntaf yn cydnabod bod trais wedi digwydd, bod ni'n cydnabod y digwyddiad yn y lle cynta, a wedi bod gyda ni swyddogion sydd yn rhai arbenigol. A dyna, os chi'n edrych ar y Casey Review neu'r gwaith mae Betsy Stanco wedi wneud, arbenigwyr wedi edrych ar y maes, dyna beth maen nhw'n galw am, yw sicrhau bod gyda ni adnoddau arbenigol yn gweithio yn y maes yma. Felly dyna rhai o'r blaenoriaethau fydd gyda Dafydd Llywelyn yn y dyfodol i ardal Dyfed Powys. A hefyd yn dylanwadu wedyn ar y lluoedd eraill yng Nghymru. Achos mae lot allwn ni wneud yn cydweithio. Ni yn cydweithio'n dda Falle na i golli'r gynulleidfa drwy weid hyn, bod fi'n cydweithio'n dda iawn gyda Comisynwyr eraill yng Nghymru ar hyn o bryd, a gyda Llywodraeth Cymru, ond fyddwn ni'n edrych i wneud na, a fydde tipyn haws ac yn gryfach os newn ni fe gyda tîm cryf Plaid Cymru.
Wrth gwrs, ie, diolch yn fawr iawn. Wrth gwrs, fel plaid, un o'n blaenoriaethau polisi ni, wel, ers fel hir efe, yw trosglwyddo'r holl rymoedd dros heddlu a dros y system gyfiawnder troseddol i Gymru. Rhywbeth sydd wrth gwrs wedi cael ei argymell gan nifer fawr o gomisynnau y mwyaf diweddar gan Comisiwn Rowan Williams a Laura McAllister, wrth gwrs. Am fel dirprwy gomisynydd, wnaethoch chi cael diddordeb penodol ynglyn â menwod yn y system gyfiawnder droseddol yn dofe. A mae pobl yn aml yn dweud taw dyma'r un o'r ardaloedd penodol y bydden gweld y gwahaniaeth fawr petai y grymoedd hynny yn cael ei datganoli i Gymru a bod na ffordd Gymreig benodol o fynd at y system gyfiawnder troseddol. Sut ydych chi'n gweld bydde hynny'n gweithio? Beth allai cael ei wneud yn wahanol syni a mwy o grymoedd dros heddlu a'r system gyfiawnder o ran menwod yn benodol?
Well, I think to begin with, one has to understand that what is behind women and law breaking. It's very different between women and men. Women, believe it or not, are imprisoned for things such as not paying their television licence, not paying their community tax, their council tax. They're not imprisoned largely for violent acts. Very often, women who are in the criminal justice system are victims of crime themselves. They are women who have been traumatised due to adverse childhood experiences. They are victims of sexual abuse. They are most often victims of domestic abuse. They are in poverty. Housing is an issue, and a lack of education is an issue. And very often they are children who have been through the care system. So it's my view that it's a public health approach that we need. So when we talk about a Welsh way of doing things, I think it's a public health way of doing things. It's a wraparound service that we need for these women. It's help and support they need, not being locked up. In North Wales, under Arfon Jones, we were very proud to support the Women's Centre in Rhyl. And I really thought, coming back into it now 4 years later, that would have been a way forward. But my understanding is that thinking has moved on, that a women's centre is not necessarily what we need in a rural environment. Actually having to transport women to a women's centre in a central location isn't always workable and efficient. And so I was really pleased to see that the way the thinking's going now is to divert women away from the criminal justice system, by using what we call Checkpoint Cymru. And this again is something that Arfon and I were able to move forward. We went up to Durham to see what Ron Hogg was doing up there. He's passed away by now, but he was the Police and Crime Commissioner in Durham, and he was very forward-thinking. And we saw how it was working up there for men. And it was adopted in North Wales in 2018 and has gone from strength to strength and has been adopted now by the force as a mainstream service and is now starting to work with women. And the emphasis is very much on health, education, housing, and really supporting women and their families. Because if women go to jail, who suffers? Every child in that relationship suffers. Those relationships are broken forever. So it's really important that women and their families are really cared for.
Can I just come in? I don't want North Wales to take all of the limelight. We've also got a diversionary scheme in Dyfed Powys, and I sneakily launched it a month before Arfon and Anne did theirs in North Wales. Not that we're competitive in any way. So, but what's important about that is that Plaid Cymru Police and Crime Commissioners have been able to instigate a policy change that nearly 3/4 the landmass of Wales now has an offender diversionary scheme active, supporting people as Anne alluded to there. So we've got the whole of the Dyfed Powys area and North Wales. I think their name for it perhaps was a little bit more catchy, Checkpoint Cymru. Ours is just an offender diversionary scheme. But that is the power of a Plaid Cymru Police and Crime Commissioner, that we're able to have these interventions that we put in place to make positive differences across our communities. O'n i'n gallu gael ti fynd heb gweud bod dyn ni'r un peth.
They saw that.
Diolch yn fawr. Dennis, if I could turn to you, just coming back to that, the theme then of what could be done differently if more powers over policing and criminal justice were devolved. Obviously, as you said, you've been a legal aid lawyer for almost 50 years, I understand.
Yeah.
So, what do you think could change in your view, thinking about your experience and perhaps frustrations with that lack of power of being able to create a Welsh way of doing things in Wales?
Well, we've never had the opportunity to do it. That's one of my complaints, because I've been involved in one of the committees I'm involved in, the National Committee for Defence Lawyers. And as a committee, we're approached by the MOJ quite often. Oh, we're just forming this committee in order to advise on so and so and so and so. Every single time I ask the same question: where is the Welsh representation? It's never there. It's absolutely outrageous. And it was the outgoing First Minister at the COVID inquiry who made the point in 3 words when he was asked, well, how would you describe the difference between Wales and England? And he said, well, poorer, older, sicker. And we need that to be taken into account, because the committees formed by the MOJ tend to be London-centric. What do they know about what we need? And as I say, the fact that we've never been allowed to sort these things out for ourselves speaks wonders, because we all know we have these issues. And I don't think the MOJ has listened to this day about our special circumstances. And so devolution is the only way forward for me.
Yeah, following on from Dennis's comments, really, it's not unusual. We shouldn't think that wanting to have our own jurisdiction in Wales and have our own legal system with our own policing service being tailored to our nation is unusual in any way, shape or form. We are an outlier in Western Europe in that we haven't got that set up. It is a strange anomaly for the Wales that we live in at the moment. And let's not forget the history as well. You know, probably 500 or 600 years ago, Wales was able to do its own laws, and they were laws that were built in the community from a point of view of repairing harm, a reparation within that. And I think we should be striving for the devolution of policing in particular, and justice. And as you alluded to earlier, Sioned, lots of commissions and reports have come out. But what are we now seeing from the other parties? Of course, we see one particular party in Westminster that, oh no, everything's all right, Jack, let's not change things. And seemingly, the party in the Senedd who would like it, but their paymasters in London aren't willing for them to do that. And in fact, Gordon Brown is now sort of retracting from some of the points that he's made in the past, only wanting us to have youth justice and probation, which is crumbs off the table as far as I'm concerned. We've got a track record of being able to sort things out ourselves in order, and I think that would be the future. And when you hear the 3 words that we use to describe Wales, that should be quite depressing listening for us, and we should be fighting to try and improve that situation, and so that we're not seen in that light by anybody. And I think genuinely that the future is quite bright for us, in particular within policing and criminal justice, albeit that there are major challenges that we need to tackle head on.
And part of those challenges are, of course, the cuts that you alluded to earlier, aren't they? I know something, again, that I've seen through my work in the Senedd is the concern around the cuts for those police officers who were providing programmes in schools. And they had both an educational value, but also a diversionary value, is what I heard from police officers who were involved in those programmes in my area that I spoke to about this, were extremely concerned about this. I don't you want to talk a little bit about that and perhaps other cuts that have affected things?
So I've mentioned earlier the police community support officers. That's one direct cut from Welsh Government through their recent tranche of funding issues that they've got. And let's not lose sight of the fact that Welsh Government have got funding issues because of the funding settlement delivered by Westminster. So let's not leave either of the two parties off the hook in this instance. In particular in relation to the schools programme, I'm a huge supporter of the schools programme. If you're not familiar with what it is, there are two elements to it. One is that you have police professionals going into schools delivering educational messages around, healthy relationships, drugs and the types of commentary you would expect from policing. But it also deals with crime and incidents that happens within the school, very much, as I alluded to earlier, under the banner of being a system which is a repairing of the harm. Mae'n system adferol o fewn ein ysgolion. A mae'r ysgolion yn falch iawn o'r cyswllt sydd gyda nhw rhwng yr ysgol a'r llu yn uniongyrchol. Mae'r arian wedi cael ei cwtogi, a fe nes i chwerthin i'n hunan, fel mae'n digwydd, pan glywes i nawr pwy yw'r cabinet newydd yn y Senedd, achos fe gwmpus i mas i'r pethefnos yn ôl gyda Lenigl, achos hi oedd wedi wneud y penderfyniad o'r allan o cyllid iechyd Llywodraeth Cymru oedd yr arian yn dod, a fe benderfynon nhw i dorri a cwtogi'r arian, cwbl o filiwnau o bunnau, a nawr mae hi yn mynd i fod yn weinidog addysg sydd yn mynd i gorfod delio gyda'r prifathrawon sydd yn danfon llythyron i fi yn ddyddiol ynglyn â'r ffaith bod ni nawr yn edrych i'w cwtogi. Felly dwi'n hapus iawn i ddatgan yma yn y Nghynhadledd fydd Comisynwyr Plaid Cymru yn cadw'r wasanaeth hynny, ond dim ond yn ei gadw fe, yn ei gryfhau, strengthening it from a point of view of taking it also to higher and further education. So I just a few weeks ago met with Aberystwyth University, who now have, through a charity called New Pathways, who deliver services in relation to sexual violence. They have an advocate that works on the campus in Aberystwyth, and I'd like for the schools programme to be enhanced to incorporate further and higher education and include aspects, as we've seen, that's been brought forward in Aberystwyth. So that would be something that would be very positive from Plaid Cymru's Police and Crime Commissioners.
Mae'n waith hynod, ni'n siarad drwy'r amser, a ni'n clywed yn rethreg y Llywodraeth yn aml iawn ynglyn â'r agenda ataliol. Achos yn y pen draw, heb sôn am stopio diafyddefaint a'r gost ddynol i beth bynnag sy'n addaw, mae fe hefyd yn arbed arian i'r pwrs cyhoeddus yn y pen draw. A dwi hefyd wedi cael nifer fawr o athrawon a chynghorwyr lleol a swyddogion heddlu yn dod ata i yn fy ardal i yn dweud, achos fel wedwch chi, ychydig yw'r ymgwirionedd o ran y cyfran o'r gyllideb yw'r arian yma. Ond mae'r effaith yn mynd i fod yn hynod o fawr. Felly'n falch iawn o glywed chi yn datgan yma heddiw a bydd hwn yn rhywbeth bydd Comisynwyr Plaid Cymru yn atal, yn mynd i'r afel ac yn
Sioned, can I come in there?
Yeah.
When I was the Deputy Commissioner, I was very, very privileged to be invited on more than one occasion to sit in with the school beat officer. Once in Hill, but also in Ysglardudwy. And the subject that was for discussion that day with 14, 15-year-old boys and girls was domestic abuse, coercive control and stalking. And I was absolutely blown away at the maturity of the discussion that went on. That these were children who were talking very sensibly, some talking about their own experiences as children within households where there's domestic abuse, but also children talking about how they were victims of stalking by their boyfriends, by their older boyfriends. And it's so important for picking up things like child sexual exploitation, for example. It's a really effective way of being able to see where a child is under duress, that it's empowering children to speak about a subject that they do actually know about because they are victims of it. So I think it's absolutely vital and essential that we continue to fund this service.
I'll just move on. There has been, of course, we know of the amazing work that is done, and that's a prime example of it, isn't it? But there's obviously, unfortunately, been negative coverage sometimes of the police force in all areas in recent years. You know, we're thinking of those historical issues such as the spy cops, you know, the behaviour, obviously, beyond our borders, but of the Met Police. But we know that elements of that culture also pervade our police forces. And, you know, last year we had, of course, those awful riots in Ely and Cardiff, where it seemed that the relationship between community and the police force wasn't what it should be. So, you know, what can be done differently to ensure that there is trust in the police forces in Wales to operate on behalf of those communities that they serve? Perhaps, Dennis, if I can come to you, because Ely would be in your part of the world, wouldn't it?
It would, yes. And I think Alan Michael made great play of the fact that I think he lived in Ely for a while. I don't think he came out of that particularly well, as it turns out. It's really difficult. I think the lesson that we learned from Alan Michael in that respect was he needs, or the PCC needs to have a really good relationship with the police, so that when they ask for information, they get the honest answers, and they don't merely set themselves up and the police force up, so that everybody comes away thinking they're never going to be told the truth. And I think that trying to ensure that the dialogue that the police have, or through us, the communities have with the police, is open, and it's never found to be lies, or merely perhaps being careful with the truth, not to give it all out, or if you are holding stuff back, at least make it clear that you're holding stuff back, and explain why. I think most people understand the need for investigations and the need for not everything to be said, but for some reason there seems to be a failure, doesn't there, in terms of this dialogue. I must admit, you know, even as a criminal lawyer, you know, we get a poor dialogue, and it's only because people like me have been doing it for so long. We know when we're being played, so we're not played. We can actually be upfront. But ordinary members of the public, they don't know these things, and I think that's a skill that we need to bring to bear, so as to make sure that everything is open. Can I just mention as well that, sorry, going back a little bit, the CCTV that we see sometimes in our town centres. Well, I think it's about time that whoever's running our CCTVs is also honest with the members of the public, because in Barry we have CCTV, but it never seems to be looked at, it never seems to be monitored, you know, so if only they would tell us that, we wouldn't have to rely on it, would we, and other things could be done. It's absolutely sickening, really, what happens. They just happen to have one little, you know, I think in Barry Town Centre, they look at the town hall where nothing happens, and they don't bother with the fact that somebody's breaking into the shops. But there we go.
It's important for me to just note, or to tell people then, that the system in Dyfed Powys is monitored 24/7. It's part of our control room, so it's an integral part of our deployment of resources. It's really important. Coming back to the point...
Can I just say we're jealous of you?
Well, you need a Police and Crime Commissioner.
I think you're probably right there, David.
On TV. It is costly, however, and it is the use of public funds as well, but it is one that certainly was very supported by the public. We did a survey, actually, of the public, and there was a lot of support for it. Coming back to the point in relation to rooting out the inappropriate behaviour internally, so there is a cultural issue within policing across England and Wales. First thing to do as leaders is to acknowledge it. So I've been on record on numerous occasions to acknowledge that we do have issues in relation to racism, sexism, misogyny within police forces. In fairness to the Chief Constable Jeremy Vaughan in South Wales, at the Black Police Conference last year, the one that has been held most recently, it was held in Cardiff, I attended, he announced from the stage that if you look at the data, you can only conclude that South Wales Police, and it's true for all police forces, there's a disproportionate representation from black, Asian, minority ethnic population within our criminal justice system. And you have to come to the conclusion that there is some institutional racism at play. So what do we do about it? Well, the first thing that we've done is that we've done a data wash. So all of the police officers, coming back to Anne's point in relation to vetting, every specific police officer has gone through the Police National Database. In the Dyfed Powys area, for example, I know that I can count on one hand the number of hits that we got. And then the professional standards internally are assessing the types and nature of those hits that we've had. It could be that somebody's been dealt with for, could be speeding and that type of the lower level offending. But it is really important that we deal with those issues. That's the main point. And from a leadership point of view, I'll put my own name through the database, and I put my office's, all of the details of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner as well. And it's through that type of leadership, grappling with some of these very difficult issues, that we'll see an improved position.
Diolch yn fawr. Mae wedi bod yn drafodaeth hynod o ddiddorol ac defnyddiol. Dwi'n erfyn arnoch chi mas fyna sy'n aelodau o Blaid Cymru i sicrhau bod y neges chi wedi gweld, dwi'n meddwl, dystiolaeth o'r ansawdd o ymgeiswyr sy'n gyda ni yma heddiw. Y gwaith sy'n gallu cael ei wneud, y gwaith fydd yn cael ei wneud os bydd gyda ni PCCs, Comisynwyr Heddlu a Throsedd Plaid Cymru mewn lle. Mae eisiau ni gael y neges mas yna. Weithiau dyw pobl ddim yn meddwl bod yr etholiad yma'n bwysig, mae e'n amlwg yn holl bwysig. Mae heddlu a'r system gyfiawnder droseddol wrth wraidd, cyfiawnder cymdeithasol wrth wraidd ein cymunedau. Please, newch yn siŵr bod chi'n annog pobl i bleidleisio. Mae'n first past the post o hyd, yn anffodus. Mae'n ni gael y pleidleisiau Plaid Cymru mas yna i gefnogi'r ymgeiswyr arferchog yma. A newch chi ddangos eich cymeradwyaeth, os gwelwch yn dda.